Hey friends, welcome back to Be Not Afraid. I am Carrie Bartholomew, otherwise known as Carib Marcel. On this channel, I lift the voices of those people who do hard things, even when it's a great risk to themselves. And today, I wanted to talk about um, something that's very dear to my heart. One is protecting kids, and two is the processes that are causing our kids so much harm. So, I want to talk about two very specific cases that are getting a lot of national attention right now. One is Anthony Metcalf, and the other one is Henry Nowak. And how these stories, how what's happened to them, how our kids can honestly become killers, how this happens with a program that started as early as in South Africa. So let's get into that. We're going to talk about South Africa. We're going to talk about Obama's mandatory policies in our schools. We're going to talk about what we've adopted in our state to bring some of these things about. Utah is a place that has had um, a substantial number of killers, and we're going to talk about the stories of these boys. So let's start with Henry's story. So Henry, if you haven't heard, if you kind of live under a rock, Henry passed away on December 3rd, 2025. He was 18 years old. He was walking home from a bar at night. The narrative of what happened as he was walking home is unclear, but there was definitely an altercation with another person. The other person decided to then stab him multiple times. Um, I'm not sure who called the police in this situation, but when the police arrived, the other person said that there was an altercation. He shows his eye, and Henry said, "I've been stabbed. I've been stabbed." And the police said, "I'm not sure you have, mate." And the other guy said, because this is the part that I left out, "Well, he's a racist." So, because he was deemed a racist or a bigot, because he was deemed these things, he was handcuffed and left to bleed out. And the cop said, and I quote, "I'm not sure you have, mate." Sorry, terrible accent. But that's what happened because somebody just accused him because they can. How did we get to a place where people can just accuse you and the police are afraid? Because that's really what happened. I don't think that the police were necessarily bigots themselves. I think they were afraid to be called a bigot. So they handcuffed the young white male and he bled out and he died right there on the street. Another young man, I'm torn on how I feel about this. I have some compassion for him and I have a lot of fury. I remember waking up on December 3rd and checking my phone like all of us do and seeing this case, this absolutely makes no sense case of a track meet and of kids getting ready to run, and one kid stabs another kid just right in the heart. And this young man takes his last breath in his twin brother's arms. Now, this is not him. This is the person who stabbed him. His name is Carmelo Anthony. And everyone and their brother is making this about race. So Carmelo left after he stabbed this person, and he walked up to these people and he said, "Yeah, I did it. There's no guessing. I did it. It was self-defense." Well, that's not what's showing in court. And a lot of people are upset for things like there are no black jurors. Well, it's hard to have a black juror when somebody says, "I don't think I could send a black boy to prison." I'm sorry, but we're not talking about a black boy here. We are talking about a murderer. These are simple concepts that, unless your brain is so caught up in this identity politics, only my group matters, this is pretty cut and dry. He admitted to murdering him. Now, we'll find out if it's self-defense because the trial has just started. But how do people get to a point where their identity politics are so... It is the only thing that defines them. Well, let's take a look at how we get there. We're going to go all the way back to post-apartheid. And as we go to post-apartheid, we had Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. And these two people did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I should get a bigger photo of myself. Okay, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, healing our past. Now, a lot of people felt that, and I'm saying this as somebody who's interviewed multiple people from South Africa. A lot of people were worried when Nelson Mandela became president. They were afraid that the young man who went into jail, who did bomb and terrorize South Africa, that this man was going to get out and be a dictator. And he really wasn't. He really wasn't. For a while, people were working together. They were trying to get past color. And so this was the time of Nelson Mandela. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was under Desmond Tutu, and it had restorative justice. Remember that term, restorative justice, truth-telling for healing, not punishment, and a hopeful start. The late 1990s through 2003, there was a shift under a man named Mbeki to economic redress. And here's where things got more angry, more grievance-centered. Policies came into place with something called the BBBEE, which is the broad-based Black economic empowerment. Broad-based Black economic empowerment, which allows you today to discriminate against white people. Now, the common sense kind of thing is that when a wrong happens, we should learn from it. That's what I always tell my students. Like, we learn history to learn from the past and not repeat the mistakes that we've made, and to repeat the things that we did right. But instead, they take racism from one side and take it all the way to the other, and in some pretty extreme ways that a lot of people honestly didn't experience. I talked to people, again, from South Africa, white South Africans who grew up, and for them, they're servants, and yes, they were their servants, so you might have to wrestle with that kind of thought, but their servants were like members of the family. And whatever you think about that, and trust me, I would not want to have lived there, but whatever you think about that, compared to songs like Kill the Boer, compared to people having to lock and secure and to work together to make sure that people don't come and assault their women and children, to use a nail gun on elderly women to kill them, those kind of things versus being the chauffeur, I mean, you have to wrestle with it. But I think that a reasonable person would say that one is quite a bit more dangerous than the other. One is quite a bit more of a hardship. And one of the things that I found interesting is I was watching some documentaries on South Africa and how scary it is. How if you get into a taxi today, you may not make it to where you're going. And the taxi driver goes, "It didn't used to be this bad. Times were better before." And the taxi driver was a Black man. And then there's also things like colorism that goes with this broad-based Black economic empowerment. Colorism, meaning that someone like me who is more fair, of an African American, would be a less of a class than a very, very dark person. See, bigotry, it is an absolute lie that bigotry only goes in one way and it's only by white people. It's not. Racism, the same thing. It is not only one direction and only by white people. In fact, the other day I was listening to a teacher speak, and he had said that in his class, he, tried to create this rainbow coalition, all of these kids who were different in the UK, all of these kids who could get along totally differently. And then all of a sudden he had an immigrant girl come into class, and there were two boys in the class, and they were very, very nice boys, like the most friendly kids. And so he puts this new girl in a row with them, and she's very upset, and she says something and he doesn't know what she says. So he takes her to a teacher who can interpret it. And the young immigrant girl said, "I don't want to be with the Blacks." So we need to stop pretending. And the fact is that every minority knows. I'm pretty sure everyone knows, but most people have gotten this place where we must self-censor and can't say the truth. But pretty sure every minority knows that different minorities oftentimes do not get along with each other. So this whole manufactured, we will work together, will all be one thing, isn't going to happen. And it certainly isn't going to happen with bad policy. So let's take a look at some of that bad policy. So this was the BBBEE explained. And it says it measures the effective partnership of ethnicities by Black people, of entities by Black people. Sorry, it's kind of hard to read. I'm going to go back to my other one just because that's where all of my notes are. So let me go over here. And let's see. Institutionalized racial preferences, egregious anti-white policies, racial targets for Black ownership, transfer stakes to Black partners. So they would just take away property. Oh, kind of like what's going on, what Mom Donnie in New York is talking about. They would take away property to Black partners. Whites got a score of 0. So they're counting this scorecard. And on this scorecard, if you are white, you count as 0 for your business, which can put your business in a lot of hot water. Okay, so they managed control, hiring, promotions, procurement, government contracts require high scores. So they were giving people better opportunities based on the fact that they were African American, in a way of, in their view, reconciling. Okay. One of the things you have to understand is that the Boers have been there for like 400 years. And where they took land was a place that other people didn't come. Like sometimes people would migrate down for a season and then they would leave, but people didn't inhabit this. They did not know how to farm. And so they took this land from these farming communities that fed all of these other people. And they said, "No, we don't like white people, so we're going to just take them away from you." And then unfortunately, people started starving because they couldn't farm. Again, bad policy. Bad policy, maybe with empathy, but as you'll find, a ton of these people at the top are as corrupt as it gets. They're living like kings while their people are dying, while they are starving because of bad policy. So preferential procurement, white-owned businesses lose out on state work, land expropriation, targets white farmers, tied to kill the Boer. Okay. The outcomes: elite enrichment for some, persistent Black poverty, more poverty than before, high unemployment, high immigration, or the whites were leaving, and they were the ones who knew how to do the business, and they were leaving. All of this matters because we have bad policy in America today. And here's the thing, at the same time about when this was all coming into fruition, okay, so this stuff starts in broad based, so just about the same time as we get a new president. And so this is the new president that we get, and everybody's so excited. Oh my gosh, we have started to heal. We have started to heal because um we've we're no longer I'm going to try to say it without laughing. We're no longer racist as a society because we elected a black man. But see, the people who did that were only focused on race, which I think arguably proves that they are quite race centered and by extension racist. So if I changed my lighting, you'd be able to tell, but Mr. Obama and I are very similar in complexion. So I never fell for, oh, this person is just like me, because I saw this person as a human being, and honestly, a human being I did not like very much. Because just because I didn't like his policies, because I was paying attention to those, not the color of his skin. Too bad more of us can't do that. So, when Obama comes into office, he writes a couple of dear colleague letters. The first one is diplomatic ties. Let's see, he has diplomatic ties with South Africa. In 2014, the Dear Colleague letter, which was the DOJ plus the Department of Education, schools were pressured on disparate impact. Black or minority students statistically couldn't face more discipline than their white peers, even if they were getting in more trouble. So here's where the chaos in schools started. If a student got in trouble who was of color, number one, it's going on in the schools, but also because we now have a black president, people are highly thinking about, ooh, who's oppressing me, who's bullying me, who's whatever. And so people were afraid to discipline kids who quite frankly needed it. And that's one thing. And honestly, that's a problem in the classroom. It made a lot of teachers face burnout, and the effects that it's had on our kids has not been a good one. So, so even if their behavior warranted, federal investigations risked funding if more black children got in trouble than another group of kids, even if the behaviors warranted it. So then they pushed restorative justice. Restorative justice, that is when someone, a criminal or a kid who is getting in a lot of trouble, if it's in the school situation, sits in a room and watches the person who they have harmed, watches that person squirm, maybe resent them, and is told that, oh, you need to be a better person and understand where this person's coming from. Well, the person might just come from, I wanted what you have. They might just come from, they're an angry person. But the more and more the little psychopaths, or also the kind of trained to be psychopaths, um, sit in and watch that other person be uncomfortable, the more they think restorative justice is hilarious. And that tends to be, other than the ones that are getting interviewed for Instagram, that tends to be what generally happens. These kids know they're not going to get in trouble. Kids will be absolutely deplorable and get sent to the principal's office with a teacher who's just like, "What do I do here?" And the kid will come back with candy. So you tell me what lesson that gives a young person. So they pushed restorative justice, and then we brought in social and emotional learning. And our social and emotional learning, that was a good time because social and emotional learning, as I have said multiple times, is just part of the whole DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Equity is the part that people need to understand. It's equal outcomes. Now, let's remember how that worked in South Africa. You had the people who pushed the bad policy living like kings, and everyone else really struggling. So then you take that really struggling because of those equal outcomes, maybe academically, because they're no longer supposed to focus on those things. They're no longer supposed to get their worth by their accomplishments, but they're just supposed to be filled with you matter, you are seen, you are the best. And if you are black, then you are virtuous. And that happens. So all of a sudden, the kids start to see things that look a lot like this in the classroom. So this, hopefully you can all see it, is a wheel of privilege and power. I've shown it before, but this time I actually did the work of trying to get the best kind of image that I could here. And so take a look at that wheel because this is something that most schools have adopted. This is called ethnic studies. Ethnic studies, right? We always bring something in with a Trojan horse. Ooh, George Floyd died. And since George Floyd died and we need to have racial reconciliation, let's have gender reconciliation. You can see here that there's 4 different kinds of genders, but if you look over here, there are 8 different kinds of genders that your child is supposed to know. And if they don't know, they're not supposed to be able to graduate. This is supposed to be a mandatory program. And in many states, it is a mandatory program. You can thank me for sounding the alarm in Utah and having it put only on hold. Remember that when you vote, because there are people who will absolutely put this right back in if they have the opportunity to do so. So let's go back to Mr. Obama and what he did. So discipline became a liability. Teachers were hesitant to enforce anything. They were so afraid because if they punished a kid of color, especially a black kid, if they punished that kid, they had to write why they did it and how they felt and whether or not they had racial feelings. And they had to have a struggle session within themselves and they had to have a struggle session with their teachers. And the kids knew it because kids aren't stupid. So they knew they're getting this message. I can do what I want. That's the message that we're sending to a certain group of kids who are seeing a wheel like this. And let's go look at that wheel again. So you've got this wheel and it tells you all of the people of power. So this basically for a kid is, oh, those are the people I can bully. Ooh, you're male and you're white. Oh, and you're Christian. Oh, you're definitely a cracker. That's literally the way the kids were thinking. Now, you have to understand that in the Black community, and that is not all Blacks, but in the Black community, they have something called liberation theology. That means part of it comes from this man, James Cone, and I believe it's in the 70s. I did not write that in my notes. But so it comes out and it literally tells them that their victimhood makes them virtuous. Why would you ever get rid of it? You're special simply because of the melanin in your skin and what your grandparents may or may not have gone through. Because let's be real, a lot of people are first or second generation Black, and wasn't slavery in their family. And we can also have a conversation that we never have in school that slavery wasn't only a Black thing and that there were Blacks who owned slaves. But we can't have that because then you can't have that narrative that breaks you down, really. That narrative that you are a victim. And so we should switch things and center the world around you. What happens when you tell a kid that the world should be centered around them, that the world owes them? What kind of kid are you building? What kind of young man are you building? You might build the kind of man who takes a knife to a track meet and kills the twin brother of another person because he was told to move. By the way, I was just reading right before I jumped on, and it was an unspoken rule that you didn't go under somebody else's tent. Now, it was raining, so maybe, but if, and that's an if because it's massive conjuncture at this point, but if this kid has a chip on his shoulder, if he's being belligerent or whatever, and somebody asks him to leave, then he probably should have just left. Maybe try to talk him, "Hey guys, I'll cool down. I just don't want to get wet." But that's not what happened. Instead, he said, "Try it and see what happens." But he's been built up to this. He fully expected he's going to get away with it. It's self-defense. Oh, and by the way, the other guy's white. So then they take this guy and they make him a celebrity. And within like a week, they've raised $500,000 for him. And the family is not very responsible with the money from what everything shows. And they start asking for more money well before the trial's ever taking place. And of course, all the vicious trolls get out there and they decide that they are Team Anthony simply because of the melanin in their skin. And what a disservice to tell these kids it's the most important thing about them. But we do it over and over and over again. We tell kids you're special because you're different. But we don't tell it to every kid because we've got this two-tiered system and we have some people who no longer are relevant. So with Carmelo, he killed this young man on April 25th. He's claiming self-defense. They are bringing the most performative experts out to be his spokesperson and representatives. They're getting paid well. And currently the trial's ongoing. There have been only a few jurors who were Black or potential jurors. And whether they decided that maybe they didn't want the heat of actually being fair, or whether they really didn't even have the wherewithal to say, yes, I can be impartial, wink wink. They said they couldn't be. And so it's not an all white, but there's no black jurors. There are they said one person's a person of color, and then they said there's one Asian and mostly white males. But one of the things you have to realize is that this is not just for kids. There's so many places where people are forced into this in their work life. There are people who self-censor, don't say anything, and who truly at this point believe the cult of this. And you don't know that they're not the ones who are on the trial right now. So let's bring it home, like all the way home, and let's bring it into Utah. So Utah had a group that sprung up. I'm not exactly sure when it sprung up, but it's called Equality Utah. And it definitely jumped on the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter bandwagon. And so a lot of people joined it and believed it. And there's quite a few um, people in Utah who keep racism alive. And she's one of them. Her name is Becky Edwards. She was a member, I think, of the Senate for quite a while. She calls herself a Republican, which is quite funny. Well, I mean, she's probably a Republican. She definitely has disdain for the true conservative, but at the same time, she's colonizing them at the same time. So, what I mean by that is she is handpicking who's getting elected. And so, let me give you just a few of their values. So they're funneling. Okay, so Becky has something called the governing pack. So Becky has the governing pack, and that's where she selects people who are her version of moral. Okay, so Utah Conservatives Values Project is actually money that's coming in from the Walmart people, which honestly makes me not want to go to Walmart anymore. And what's kind of sick is because it's conservative values, right? And what they mean by that is we're better conservatives than the conservatives. This is not the MAGA crowd. We're the true conservatives. And she's handpicking across the state who will get elected. And they have no problem with lying. They have no problem, and I'll explain that to you in the simplicity that Equality Utah started off, being like the whole like George Floydy racial reconciliation, but really it's all about the gender stuff. So once again, minorities, specifically African Americans, are used. They're useful until they're not anymore because the real goal is shoving gender down our throat. Again, let's look at that map yet again. We feel that people need to understand that our history as American is so much more complicated, and so we need to study ethnicities. So you tell me what an ethnicity is, because you don't even see it on here. I don't see ethnicities. I don't see Mexican, Peruvian, Chinese, Japanese. You do see European. That's a bad thing. But you don't see, oh, and even English and French. Okay. You don't see, though, oh, wait, indigenous peoples. And I think that's it. You don't see this. It's not a focus on cultures. In fact, and this is the stuff that I've covered for a really long time, which is why, and by a really long time, I mean 6 years. So for 6 years, I've been covering this stuff, trying to say, don't put that in our schools. It's a really, really bad idea. It's going to divide. It's going to cause resentment. And people just went, oh, she doesn't know. She couldn't possibly know. No, I couldn't possibly know. I couldn't possibly know what it is to walk through life as a minority in a very my kind of minority space. Definitely not. I couldn't possibly understand that people who've already been taught that this group of people doesn't like them, because that is what you're taught, especially in ghetto culture. So if you're taught that and you're like a little 2-year-old, and when you see the police, you go, bang, bang, shoot the pig. If that's what you're taught as a little tiny child, then when you get to see this in school, it's like, woohoo, I'm special. And for the kid in the back who fits into this center part, they're getting another message. And if you don't think that that message is going to turn people so much further to the right, you don't think. You're creating bigots. That's what I see. I see state sanctioned bigotry brought to you all, my friends, by this woman right here. This woman who, rumor has it she's got at least one family member who's part of the queer community. But here's the thing, no one cares. And we shouldn't be forced to, because I don't hate this person. I don't know this person from Adam. If this person walked by me, I would not have any idea who they were. And as long as they were a nice, cool person, I would be a nice, cool person back. But when you decide that you get to walk in and you get to claim what the new word for the new definition of conservative is, well, then we have a real problem. So it has made donations to other conservative efforts, such as an initial 14,000 contribution to Becky Edwards' governing group PAC. And that goes to basically every person that she has deemed is qualified to be on our school boards. And if she deems that you're not, you won't make it on. I mean, it's a very, very hard race because she controls a lot. And I mean, this is the kind of conservative they are. This is from, the Walmart group. They did the whole no kings. These are the kind of conservatives that they are, because you have to understand, and I know that I say this all the time, no truth, but power. So if we, and also whoever controls the language wins. So if we can redefine what conservative means, which just means you're quiet and you're peaceable and you do whatever your overlords tell you to do, then we're kind of screwed. And sadly, that may be who is in Carmelo's. That may be the kind of conservatives that are in Carmelo's jury. We'll see. We'll see. I feel for this kid because you can't help how you're raised. I feel for this kid because we have a culture that makes it normal. I mean, one guy at the court said the only good cracker is, and you can finish the rest. So if that was said in the other direction, it would be mayhem, right? I mean, there would be riots, there would be looting, there would be the language of the oppressed. But I would argue that when kids have to walk into a classroom and see this and know that they fit into this, they're choosing a new oppressed class. Or go back to him. They didn't even consider that he could be telling the truth. Because, I mean, a minority said you weren't. And it does not matter. I mean, the amounts of crime in the UK, the craziness, because people censor, self-centered as well, but people self-censor because they can go to jail for saying the truth there. And if you don't think that we're just about there right here in Utah, then you aren't paying attention. Because as we bring ideas in, like the dignity index, as we bring in groups who completely infiltrate, take over communities that would never, if you had to have truth serum before you could run for office, and a person had to say, yes, I live in your neighborhood, but I don't believe a thing that you do. I think you're absolutely dirt beneath my feet, and I'm going to shove all this stuff down your kids' throat. They'd never say yes. But they do, because these people do not believe you have to be honest. Because when you're a second-class person, you don't deserve honesty. And unfortunately, this man, just by virtue of being a white male, was a second-class citizen. Just like so many today, just by virtue of having voted for President Trump for whatever reason they chose to is a second-class citizen. So I just want to show you a few facts here. Here are $6.2 million raised in the 2023-2024 cycle by Conservative Values PAC. And what they did is they went after the most conservative, and some people argue whether or not he is, but the most conservative candidate. And instead, they put somebody who's always been a Democrat, but changed because he moved to Utah. And they supported him. I was there. I watched until like past midnight as we tried to vote and vote and vote and vote and protect that last little vestige of the idea that your vote matters, that the everyday person could actually be heard, that and be respected. And these people stood there and made sure that their candidate was the one who made it past. So there's their candidate, $6 million to a person who's already wealthy. I don't think you understand the people who are fighting so hard. I know people who are in races and their budget, like total, is $1,500. But they're fighting so hard because they think this is unfair. I understand that because I was one of them in the last election. This is unfair. It's not even truthful. This idea that you couldn't possibly be privileged if you're a minority, that's garbage. Carmelo Anthony's home, they bought a new home. They said they needed it for security purposes. They also bought 2 new cars. But his first home was already quite nice. From their words, great student, captain, I believe, of the football team, good, good grades, clean cut. From their words. I don't know what's true and what's not, but from their words, those things, okay? That is not an underprivileged child. It's not. But by this, simply by virtue of the melanin in your skin, you are considered underprivileged. You are considered a victim. And when you're considered a victim, well, then we need to do what we do, which is always in ethnic studies, always in any of the studies. Okay, so the big thing about these guys is that they may pretend that the color is the big ol' issue, but really it's gender. Constantly, always, every day, all day, gender, gender, gender. That's their focus. Okay, but for every single child, this is what school will look like when they have a board filled with the people they want it filled with. For every single child, you're supposed to look at this wheel and kind of circle, okay, well, I am this, but I'm not this, I'm not this, and I'm not that. Those are called your points of intersectionality. It's been interesting to watch because DEI, the term has been purged, but I've spoken to school board staff, so not your leaders, but the staff, and they have very casually said, "Oh, but that's about points of intersectionality, right? Oh, we don't have DEI, but we have points of intersectionality." Okay, same thing. That's the easiest way to put it. It is the same thing. And so what you're supposed to do as a kid is to find your points of intersectionality and kind of figure out where you land on their list. The first thing you have to do is you have to swallow this lie that this is who you are. It doesn't matter if there's a million other things about you. If I were to look at this list, I fall very much on the outside, on the margins, right? Just in the fact that I grew up in the foster home, foster systems, was I am half black, was extremely abused, etc., etc. But that is not all of who I am. And this reduces you to that. And that is why, even though I am disgusted, horrified by Mr. Carmelo Anthony, I can also feel very bad for him. And I'm so much more angry about the people who decided to force these people, and by that I mean Carmelo Anthony and every other African American specifically, who has been forced to believe that because they are brown or black, that they are somehow victims. And then to soothe themselves from believing that they're victims, they believe that they are self-righteous. And see, here's the thing. So you take that thing where you have to tear down a person and you tell them, poor you, you've been through so much. And that person starts to get very angry. First, they get sad, then they get angry. The world is so unfair. Why can't I have what that person has? Oh, that's grievance. So why can't I have what that person has? And instead of going, I want what that person has, how'd they get there? Oh, they got there because their family has money. Okay, but what is another way to get there? Oh, I can get there this way. And then you have a teacher come up behind you and say, you can get there this way. And they lay it out for you. That's hopeful. They skip the hope and they go straight into the feel angry. Feel angry because you are oppressed. And that is their goal. Always, always their goal is to teach your child why they are oppressed first. Everybody. That is why the person who killed Henry, who was an immigrant, who likely had more supports than Henry, that is why he could say, I don't like him because I feel aggrieved. And because he feels aggrieved, he is then supposed to take that system and find all of his problems and find the fact that oh man, he's an immigration status, he's an immigrant, maybe he's not legal, all of that. How then do I get to be the head? Well, I can do whatever I want because I've been oppressed. That's the other thing, is that there's not just anger, there's also infantilization. So many people will tell me, oh, she's so nice. She's a really nice, a really kind person. She started off working in Head Start. And she was just, or maybe it's her father, started Head Start or something like that. She's just so compassionate towards people. If you were compassionate, you would listen to the people that you're trying to help instead of the greedy, grifting money bags who tell you whatever you want to hear so you can keep dripping the poison. This is how we got there. We got there by telling people you need to be aggrieved and you should feel so good about the fact that you have grievance. It means you're enlightened. You have a real way of knowing that nobody else could possibly experience. And because of that, there's certain things that you should get that other people can't have. And there's certain things that you should be able to do because you're just inherently better. I have seen this my entire life. I have seen minorities be far more bigoted. And what I mostly see from the white side of things, especially now that we've been so conditioned, I mostly see censorship. I mostly see avoidance. I mostly see fear. I don't think I want to be your friend because I might offend you. I might accidentally offend you, and I definitely don't want to do that. We didn't have to be that way. But we decided to elect a man who was a community organizer who worked to dismantle our country. And South Africa decided to ignore these two men and instead bring on people who shout, "Killed the Boer, the white farmer." That's what we did. And that's what we continue to do. And my friends, nothing is more frightening to me than some of the young men I know who are amazing, who are so thoughtful, going into a classroom and getting force-fed this poison and becoming resentful, becoming bitter, deciding that they hate people who aren't just like them. And there's no amount of social and emotional learning garbage that's going to change them. They're going to resent it. Maybe with those little kids, and that's why you start with the little ones, which is vile. But I mean, I know kids who consider themselves queer who hate the invasiveness of social and emotional learning. It's so manufactured. You know why it's manufactured? Because the people have such a great amount of disdain for the everyday person. They hate freedom and they think that they are just, by whatever virtue, that they get to rule over other people. And so these people, this one, fill it in with most of your elected officials. Not all of them. There are some great ones. These people truly believe that because they've read more books, they know better for you about your own life. And they're not reading the right books, because if they were, maybe African American little boys or all kids and their parents would get a course in Thomas Sowell, or maybe Judge Clarence Thomas. People who started off being bitter and angry Marxists, and then realizing that that was just not the way to live your life. But you can't hear those stories. In fact, when I ran for office, this group worked very, very hard against me, a half-Black minority from the foster system who happens to know and care a lot about education, because I wasn't going to be a yes man. And that is what this person wants. And that's what this person will get if you don't show up. And there's a part of me that's kind of like, 6 years is a long time. But then there's a part of me that looks at all of these kids and thinks, which one's going to be the next Henry? Which one's going to be the next Henry who some angry young man walks up to, or woman? I mean, girls can be vicious too. Some angry kid who's been taught that their anger is virtuous. And for here, it probably won't be race. It will probably be gender related. But who's going to walk up? Who's going to be the next Henry? But I also think about who's going to be the next Carmelo, because I've watched some beautiful little souls become angry, listen to narratives that aren't true, and suddenly find. There was one girl that I listened to, and she said, I didn't know how oppressed I was until I got to high school. And now she's like Afro wearing, Black Panther all the way. Why would you do that to someone? Why are we ruining these kids? For power? Because you want to be the overlords? I honestly can't make it make sense. So we are about to wrap up. I hope you got something out of this. I hope the next time you hear a term like restorative justice, you will not just look at the surface and go, oh, that sounds good. The next time you hear terms like social and emotional learning, you will realize that that means this is what they're going to be exposed to. And I hope the next time you get a flyer that says the governing group endorses, or the conservative PAC, or the conservative principles PAC. Let's see, what was that called again? Conservative Values Project. You will realize that these people, they do not have your best interest. If they did, they wouldn't lie to you in the first place. They disdain conservatives. I'll finish off with this because this is kind of, I'm not sure that they did this, but this is very much in their vein. And that is, right after Charlie Kirk was killed, there was a big billboard. As you're driving up into Provo, you'd see this board, man, white shirt, and outside of his neck is big red paint font that says, exposing the MAGA stain in Republican politicians. And it was put up right after he died. So you tell me how kind that is. You may be a person who thinks it's funny. You may be a person who's like, oh no, I'm totally team Black Power. Fine. I'm just team stop using the kids. All right, my friends, I'm going to wrap up there. Thank you for watching. If you watch this in the upload, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm going to try to do monologues on Friday nights unless it is date night with my husband or my son. But if it's not, I'm going to try to be here on Friday nights. And then I have interviews always on Tuesdays, or always on Thursdays, and I may add Tuesday as well. I just feel like there's so much information to get out there. And I hope you learned something. Have a great one.